So let's understand sessions and let's create a session instead of PHP. So right now, if we want to use the session variable right here, we first have to start a session. So if you want to access the session superglobal, always use session underline start before. So this right here is going to start a session. What happens once we call this function right here? So let me show you. First of all, we're going to create a session on the server. And now we can also access the session superglobal inside of our code. This session right here, in the beginning, once initialized, only probably has a session ID, for example, like so. So now if you log in, for example, you usually get the session ID from the server. You will store this session ID inside of the cookie. The cookie will be stored inside of your browser. And if you do another request now to the server, instead of sending your login data, so your username, email, or password, you're going to send this cookie instead that includes your session ID. You have the session stored on the server. You send this cookie that includes the session ID. And now the server knows, okay, the user with the session ID, so with this session ID, wants to request a certain page, for example. The server can immediately take a look at his own table and see, okay, that's the corresponding user. And he can return the data, for example, if the session ID is valid and the user is valid. Now someone is going to steal your cookie with the session ID though. He can also send this cookie with the session ID to the server. The server falsely thinks that this is the right user, the login user, and is also going to return the exact same data. Even though this user never logged in, he just stole your cookie. So if you're going to keep this session started and we never regenerate this session ID right here, then this user who stole your cookie would be able to act as if he was you forever. And this would be obviously a security risk. So it's good practice to regenerate the session ID from time to time. And a lot of people regenerate the session ID every 30 or 60 minutes. So let me show you how this works. First of all, we're going to take a look if is set if our session last regeneration property is set, then we're going to do something, and otherwise we're going to do something else. So let's first of all check if this session last regeneration variable is not set. If it is not set, that means that we just created this session right now. We've never set this variable right here at this point, so we need to set this variable for the first time and we need to regenerate the session ID. So we're going to use session underline regenerate ID and we're going to set this one to true. This right here, this true, means that we are going to delete the old session ID and replace it with the newly generated session ID. So we had this old session ID right here. This one is now invalid and we're going to have a new session ID and that one is now valid. And now we also want to track when this last regeneration of our session ID has been. So we're going to now set this variable, this superglobal variable of $_session of last generation equal to the current time. So let's imagine, for the purpose of this example, that our time is just going to be 0. Obviously in a real world application, this would be something like December 21 and so on, 1543, doesn't matter. You get the idea though. But for simplicity, let's imagine time for us starts at 0. So now we're going to say else. So if this session last regeneration has already been generated, so if we have generated it right here, then we're going to define an interval. And this interval is pretty custom, so you can choose whatever you want, but as I said, 30 minutes is good practice. So we say 60 seconds times 30, because those are now 30 minutes, is going to be our interval. And once our current time minus our interval is going to be greater or equal to session of last regeneration, then we know 30 minutes have now passed. And now let's think about this. Let's imagine we generated this time right here. Time is now 0. 1 minute passes, time is now 1. Time is going to be 2, 3, 4, and so on, until we get to the point where time is going to be equal to 30 in this minimalistic example. Now we're going to have 30 minus our interval, which is also going to be 30 in this example, because we have 30 minutes right here. So once the current time is greater than this interval, so once the current time minus the interval gets greater than our initial time, so the time of our last regeneration, which has been 0, then we're going to regenerate this session ID. So I hope this makes sense, but you can also just think about it a little more and you'll definitely get the hang of it. So in this case, we're going to again call session underline. So session underline regenerate ID true because we want to delete the old ID. And now we need to override our session superglobal of last regeneration and set this equal to our current time. So current time now, after we've called this for the first time, is going to be 30 in our case. Now again, we're going to have 30 for our last regeneration from this point on. Time is going to tick, and at a certain point we're getting to 60. 60 minus 30 again needs to be greater or equal to 30 in this case, which is the case, and then we're going to regenerate our session ID again. So I know this was a pretty simple example, but it works the exact same way with the real time. So I hope you get the idea. And as you can see, we regenerated the ID, and some of you might ask what is going to happen with the cookie. And obviously the cookie is going to be invalid once the session ID does not exist anymore on the server. So you could, for example, send this cookie that has the old session ID, but obviously that session ID does not exist anymore, so this cookie becomes invalid. If an attacker, for example, steals this cookie with the session ID, then this cookie with the session ID is not valid after 30 minutes anymore, and he cannot access your account therefore. Every time you regenerate the session ID, PHP makes sure that you automatically get the new cookie though. So if it is you, you're getting the new cookie, and a potential attacker would have to steal a new cookie again to get access to your account.